Above the vaulted ceiling of the diplomatic wing, the silence was absolute. Kalen pressed his chest against the cold, flex steel of the maintenance duct, his breath a slow, rhythmic ghost in the dark. Below him, through the slats of a ventilation grate, the Obsidian Fong leader leveled a pulse pistol at the High Archon's throat. Kalen's fingers ghosted over the hilt of the weapon he had sworn never to touch again. Have you ever wondered if the person standing next to you is exactly who they claim to be? What would you do if you realized their restraint wasn't a choice, but a cage? Let's see what happens when the cage finally breaks. The silk of Kalen's formal vest had felt stifling then, for hours before the screams started and the lights of Ethelgard Hub flickered into emergency crimson. It was a clerk's garment, cheap and functional, designed to disappear into the background of the Great Hall. Beneath the gilded rafters of the Ethelgard Hub, the air tasted of ozone and expensive synthetic wine. Kalen stood by the refreshment plinth, adjusting his cuffs. Beside him, Alara looked radiant in shimmer weave, though her eyes kept darting to the elite species circling the room. High Archon Zalthar, a towering avian with plumage the color of bruised plums, was currently holding court. He gestured broadly with a wine flute, his voice carrying over the melodic hum of the gravity harps. Zalthar laughed, a sharp, clicking sound. And here we have the humans. A fascinating study in evolutionary stagnation. So much potential for aggression, yet they choose the path of the scribe and the janitor. It is a peculiar kind of cowardice, isn't it? To mistake a lack of teeth for a soul of peace. Kalen didn't look up from his drink. He felt Alara's hand tighten on his forearm, her pulse a rapid drumbeat against his skin. She wanted to say something, to defend their species, but Kalen simply took a sip of the bitter synthale. Truth is, the galaxy saw human pacifism as a defect. They looked at a species that had nearly burned its own world to ash and assumed the subsequent era of diplomacy was a sign of broken spirits. They didn't understand that for a human, peace wasn't a natural state. It was a grueling, daily discipline. It was the act of holding a predatory instinct by the throat every single second of the day. A muffled thud. The sound was distant, vibrating through the soles of Kalen's shoes before it reached his ears. The gravity harps cut out, replaced by the rising whine of a station-wide depressurization alarm. Panic, sharp and metallic, flooded the hall. The Great Hall's massive doors hissed shut, locked by an external override. From the balcony above, figures in matte black tactical gear descended on maglines. The Obsidian Fong. Kalen didn't run. While the diplomat scrambled and Zalthar shrieked for his guards, Kalen's world narrowed. The frantic noise of the room faded into a series of tactical data points. 6 shooters on the floor. 4 on the balcony. Entry point sealed. He gripped Alara's shoulder, his voice dropping an octave, losing its soft, clerical lilt. Alara, look at me. Go to the service alcove behind the bar. There's a reinforced locker labeled Emergency O2. Crawl inside, and don't come out until you hear my voice. Kalen, what are you?
Now.
But the man she saw in that moment wasn't the clerk who forgot to pick up the laundry. His eyes were cold, reflecting the emergency strobes with a flat, predatory stillness. He watched her go, then turned toward the apartment partition he had spent 3 years pretending didn't exist. Kalen punches through the ceiling tile and drops into the center of the room, his blade catching the light as he lands in a low crouch amidst a dozen aimed rifles. If you want to see the master of the blade in action, subscribe now and don't miss the conclusion of Kalen's return. The partition in the hallway didn't just hide a weapon. It concealed a history of blood that Kalen had spent a decade trying to wash from his hands. He pressed his palm against the biometric sensor, and the wall hissed open, revealing a slim, matte black case. Inside lay the monofilament gladius, a weapon of such terrifying precision that its very existence was a treaty violation in half the known sectors. Silence. Kalen gripped the hilt, and for a second, the weight of the blade felt like an old friend returning to a house it had once burned down. He tapped his ear, activating a subdermal comms link that hadn't seen power in years. Commander Vorik, this is Ghost 6, Kalen said, his voice flat and devoid of the clerical warmth he used at the office. "I am on site. Declare a sovereign protocol and pull your security teams back to the perimeter. If they enter the diplomatic wing, they'll only get in my way." On the other end of the line, there was a sharp intake of breath, then a stuttered confirmation. The station's official security forces were good, but they were trained for riots, not surgical neutralization. They were hammers, and right now, Ethelgard needed a scalpel. Kalen moved through the shadows of the secondary corridors, navigating by memory and the hum of the station's life support. He saw the world not as a home, but as a series of sight lines and choke points. The nature of strength, he realized, wasn't found in the shouting of the hierarchon, but in the terrifying quiet of a man who knew exactly how to end a life. Inside the maintenance shaft above the conference room, the air was hot and tasted of recycled grease. Kalen watched the obsidian fawn leader through the slats. The man was arrogant, fueled by the cultural misperception that humans were nothing more than soft, desk-bound bureaucrats. And then, the moment of the drop arrived. The flex steel shrieked as Kalen kicked the grate through, the sound lost in the sudden thunder of the ceiling collapsing. He fell into the center of the hostage circle, a blur of gray and black. The first shooter didn't even have time to register the shadow before Kalen's gladius hummed through the air, shearing the barrel of the rifle in half. Kalen didn't stop to aim. He moved with the predatory fluidness of a master who had calculated every variable before his feet even hit the floor. Muzzle flashes strobed against the walls. Kalen spun, the monofilament blade whistling as it deflected a pulse slug into the ceiling. He was a whirlwind of steel, neutralizing 3 guards in the time it took the leader to turn his head. When the leader finally raised his pistol, Kalen didn't hesitate. He launched the gladius, the weapon spinning end over end like a silver needle. It buried itself in the reinforced window behind the leader's head with a crack like a gunshot. The leader flinched, his focus breaking for a fraction of a second, and that was all Kalen needed to close the gap and drive a knee into the man's solar plexus. 3 hours later, the apartment was too quiet. The gladius sat on the scarred wooden dining table, its edge still shimmering with a faint, lethal light. Alara sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. She didn't look at him. She looked at the blade. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't want you to," Kalen replied. "You're a monster, Kalen. But you're my monster." She reached out, her fingers stopping just short of the blade's edge, before moving to cover his hand. The transparency between them was a new kind of weight, heavier than any secret, yet it was the only thing holding the room together. The blade stayed on the table, a dark mirror of the peace they had built. The monofilament gladius first appeared as a source of dread, representing a life Kalen wanted to forget. In the end, it rests openly on the table, symbolizing the honesty of his 2 worlds. If you've ever had to embrace a part of yourself you feared, join us tomorrow as we explore more stories of the legends hidden in plain sight.